Thanos.
Hello, Yue.
So we're doing the part 3 of our series, right?
Yes, we want to welcome you to the third part of our first series about the competitiveness of the EU, in case you forgot what it is about. And to give a little bit of more context, as we would like to do in general, this part will always be a kind of debate, let's say. Whereas, of course, I mean, how do you understand debate?
So each of us will take one of the position to bring up, certain opinions, which region is more competitive, I would say.
Yeah, and not only the regions, but I would say it's about like how specific perspectives of the competitiveness report about which we talked have, let's say, pros and contras, and you can go and say, for example, I think this is a good thing, or I think this is not such a good thing, the way they did it, and we will try to take positions which are, let's say, a little bit apart from each other, so that we have a kind of, at the end, let's say, a result, right?
Or how the Star Trek will take on. Here is the conclusion.
Exactly. And now the conclusion, I think it was the right...
Now it's the conclusion.
Exactly. Okay, so what is our first perspective? So we talked about the competitiveness report. We had also Davide here as a guest. What is the first thing we want to talk about where we found out that it's a little bit different in Europe and in other places? And
one aspect, I think Davide also mentioned, is the aspect of or the perspective of how mindset will change innovation, or how is that related to each other?
Right. This was the part where he talked about, for example, how companies in the US go about, for example, with their management, and how companies in the EU do that.
Yeah, so how leadership style can either promote or demotivate innovation.
Right.
Of each of the employees.
And what we are taking as positions in this first part, I would say, is for the EU, which will be my part, a top-down approach, which means more or less that management dictates how the innovation should be, no? And has a concept, let's say, and gives it top-down to anybody who has to apply it, let's say, or develop it. And how would be in the US?
In the US, I think he brought up a very interesting aspect in terms of innovation. Mm-hmm. He said that even the general leadership style is more top down. Mm-hmm. That's the manager has more like authority.
There's a hierarchy, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The narrative, like how the process should work and how which way should lead to, but generally is if one of the reports have a very good concept or idea, and generally the manager will allow or accept the new idea or the new concept.
Right, exactly.
Rather than to oppress through like this kind of like, oh, this is not a process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's this kind of this kind of contradictory leadership style. I mean, the leadership style is more top down, but the innovation style is more bottom up.
Yeah. So
even that's not somehow consistent.
Right.
You can say.
Exactly. And I was thinking about it as you were saying it. A good way to summarize it would be in Germany, for example, we know, which is a good representative for the EU, leadership is more inclusive, right? But in and by itself. You feel more flat hierarchies, for example, in most companies, but disrupting processes, which is what happens when you bring innovation, is not well seen.
Yes,
so
correct.
The point of somebody down below bringing a new idea and wanting to do things differently, just to try out something, because it's innovation, it's not well seen. Whereas in the US, for example, that would
because it's not part of the process.
Exactly.
It's not well seen if you disrupt the process.
And the process is holy. That's the point.
Process is holy.
Especially in Germany. Yeah.
You're not allowed to touch it. So.
Yeah, exactly. And in the US, it's like, okay, somebody would, I think we said at some point it would be some kind of, let's say, heroism, right? So there is this more individual perspective of anybody can bring a good idea and then it will be heard and maybe we will try it out, right? Even if there's a hierarchy inside.
Yeah, if someone has like a Superman idea, then everyone is eager to try it out. And there's more the the narrative, yeah, just do it, from the management point of view.
Right. And let's try to connect it a little bit with competitiveness, because I think if we accept that this is the let's say the difference between the two, then I think there are some things that come out of that, right? So for example, in the in the US, if they work this way, you have more chaotic processes, right?
Yeah.
So there is innovation, but at the same time there is not always a good way to make sure that a product will be actually very good and high quality. Whereas I would say, for example, by keeping to the processes, the EU manages to provide the high quality that is needed even in innovation, right?
Right. Yeah, and also I think this there's a huge gap between if we are talking about innovation, right? So we are talking about certain industry or certain technology, and process works very well for like the traditional industry. It's like we mentioned several times, like the automotive industry,
right,
which is really strong in Europe, in the EU, yeah. But when in terms of innovation, like so there's mainly, I would say, focusing on, let's say, like semiconductor, like chip industry, or even the AI industry, yeah. And this process driven approach is not working, I would say. It's because you don't have like a experience factor. You don't have like something to match with, to look at, okay, this is how it worked and it is working.
Yeah.
There's nothing to compare.
You don't have a benchmark, right?
Yeah,
you have
you
something
don't have
completely
a
new.
benchmark, exactly.
I would agree then at that point that in giving a point to you, or this approach which the EU does not take, that when you want to be first in the market, for example, which is an important thing, especially in order to be competitive, then it's good to have these disruptive processes, right? Because just in theory, if you have a process and you want to keep at it, even if you do innovation somehow, then it will take much more time and you will not be first in the market. And even if your idea is better, as we know very well, then it will not hold up, because somebody will be first in the market and people will be already buying their product, whatever it is, software, smartphones, whatever, right? But on the other hand, I'm still thinking, how can you be competitive when your processes are chaotic? For me, it's a little bit of a also like a contradiction, right? Like, how can you produce something, like be a good company and competitive company, if you have more of a chaos inside, right?
Yeah, but I guess you have to have first the product and then to establish the working process,
right,
to develop or to produce a product,
okay.
I think. So maybe it's more like a chicken egg problem, right? So first that you can also say if the process working, but then, so from my experience, my working experience is if there's a good established process, then it takes much longer just to fit everything into the process sometimes,
right.
And if the product is completely new, that you don't have anything to, like you said, as to benchmark, to compare with, then you don't know how the process should look like,
right.
And you cannot just drop in some, like putting in the equation, okay, this equation is working, and I just put into that equation. I think this is difficult to get on with.
Yeah, I would say you're right, and no, if you want to do something completely new, which that people will like, for example, you have to have a good, and that's being competitive, right? Being competitive means that if either what you're doing is cheaper or what you're doing is something that really has innovation, and then the only question becomes, how do you foster innovation in the best way? But even if I agree with that point, I would say still, like, for being first in the market, right? I agree with that. This is a boon the way Europe does not do it. it's a boon for US, for example. But on the other hand, you don't need to be always first in the market, right? The mindset is maybe good for you to be second in the market, but at the same time be good enough and have a good strategy that allows you to still be competitive, because you, for example, you see the mistakes that are done in the first product and you try not to reproduce them. The only problem that I would say, wanted to criticize my position a little bit, this assumes that you have a good strategy. Whereas I think usually the problem in the EU is that the strategy is not very good. The strategy is just let's wait and see.
Yeah, I think the strategy is more like everywhere.
Yeah,
and it's not
all over the place,
consolidated and focused. And this is probably the problem, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I would agree, like, to bring it down to this part, I think if we agree that competitiveness is a matter of speed as well, right? Then certainly what EU does is not the best. But if you change the picture a little bit and see it's not only about speed, but it's also about who wins at the market at the end, like to see it in a longer time scale, let's say, then maybe EU is not that bad the way they're doing it, right?
Yeah, maybe. I think if we have a product that is mature enough for the market, then you might maybe have a shot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like let's say like maybe 10 or 15 years into the future for artificial intelligence.
Right. You can conquer also niche markets, right? You can be competitive in a way that you win some products, but not all of them, right?
But you will not be the pioneer. So
exactly, and you will miss the first money, and you will miss the opportunity, of course, to be the one that really disrupts the market. And then, as we know it, right, the best example now, when people mostly talk about systems with AI, they say ChatGPT. Why? Because they were the first one, right?
Yeah, true.
They were the first one that became visible, right? And this plays a big role because it's the first thing you're going to think about.
Just
it's like
as the Google as the most successful search engine, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So when you know the first search engine, if the words buzzwords comes out, then you think about Google.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think what we can say at the end is EU has there some potential, and of course it is a good thing that innovation is certainly an important point in the report. No? At least the EU they're smart enough to know that this is an important point that they have to take care of, right? But on the other hand, maybe there have to be some processes and mindsets that have to be changed in order to be more competitive in the way that the other players in the market are, right?
So,
because at the end, that's what's about, right? It's about who are your competitors, right?
Okay, so then I think we can talk about a bit apart from mindset, to the next topic, so which is also very important, and it's infrastructure or structure for the innovation. So, as we all know, infrastructure in the US for new technology is mostly driven by the private sector.
Exactly.
And as how the statistic and the data shows.
Exactly. I think it's in the report, right? Also.
Yeah, it was also in the report. Yes.
Yeah, and this is an interesting point, because in the EU it's like the other way around. Of course, there are companies which keep their own infrastructure, but certainly infrastructure to do some things and new innovation is usually much more centered, right? Because you don't have companies like Google or Apple, for example, which have their own infrastructure and maybe can even offer it to others. But in essence, the EU is dependent on them, right? So if you go to a cloud in the EU at the moment, you have to usually use the infrastructure of somebody else. On the other hand, and that's a good point, EU already builds, and that's also part of the report, their own data centers, for example, right? Yeah. And it's co-founded by the European Union. Sometimes it's on a state level, sometimes it's on an institute level, for example, in some countries. But the model is generally to manage to build some data centers which will be rather centrally managed, I would say, and then would be able to be used by everybody for a service fee, for example.
Okay.
Right?
So you're talking about big government, right?
Yeah,
That's
basically
how
it's about big
American will
government.
put it.
Yes, if you're American, you hear about that, you're like, wow. So you want to make it even bigger, like as if you didn't have enough governments already in the EU, and then you want to make you're going to give a large resource to the government, right? I see that might be also problematic, not from the ideological point of view, but more from the practical point of view, because how do I know, or let's say I'm a country in the EU, right? Because it's about who uses it, or a company in a country. And then I want to use these data centers. I don't have any direct link to influence this procedure, for example, how expensive it is, right? And then and if I want something, usually it has to be a bureaucratic process, which in order to take the funds, in order to use that, and for some university and R&D projects, that's quite okay. But if you are, like we were saying before, a small company who wants to disrupt, then basically that kills you.
Yeah,
right?
I guess that's I would say that's fair for the small and medium enterprises, because you don't have a direct funding or investment capital investing capital to build your own data center, for example.
Right.
And then so you're going to use the government funded data center, and then to run your own large language model, for example. So
right, and this is actually a good point, though, I think, for the EU, right? Because at least in the sense of who it is available for, then the EU actually wins in that case, right? It would be more broadly available, and therefore possible for also small companies to somehow go to big resources, rather than only being a matter for the larger companies.
Yeah, but again, as American, they will say, who likes big government? We want a small government. So
yeah. Fair enough. I mean, it's also more flexible, right? In a way.
It's more flexible, less regulation. That's all more like a Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And what about China, though, right? What are they doing? I think they have a kind of hybrid model in that sense, right, for the infrastructure.
China has even bigger government, I would say.
Right, exactly.
It's bigger than the EU, I would say. So generally, in terms of the AI directives, governments funds or give the goals and objectives for the next 5 to 10 years. How the AI should go. Which direction they should go. Yeah. And they also kind of fund or partially fund the projects. And then there are small companies that they will enter the industry with their idea. Like DeepSeek was a very small company. It was a company that has only 15 people or so.
Crazy,
it's a
right?
Private company, you know. So. And then they enlarge themselves. They extended themselves and expand and become very successful because the large language model works very well, even with the less resources. So this is more like I would say how I think in some book they describe it as a state capitalism.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a motto that is used often. Right. So you have capitalism, but you have like the state. Saying that infrastructure comes from us, or is somehow maybe even sponsored, right?
Sponsored, funded, yeah.
That's the point. And then this is actually good, because it goes to the core of the matter. At the end, it's not about who owns the infrastructure. At the end, it's about how fast can you be and how cheap can you be. That's it. That's what it's about, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's.
In terms of innovation, yeah.
That's what competitiveness is about, right? If you can manage to do that somehow, either by helping, right, directly, or by ensuring that there are lower salaries, for example, then again the products can be more competitive, right? And we saw that with DeepSeek, for example, right? And I know also probably the prices even for having like on-premise models for DeepSeek are better than
much cheaper than the ChatGPT account, as the premium account. Yeah.
Imagine then what a company would do if it had to choose between the two, and basically they don't see a difference, right?
Yeah, and especially it runs on much cheaper GPU. So.
And you know what though? This is a good example though for what we were saying before, right? Even if DeepSeek wasn't the first in the market, right? It wasn't the first. It's okay.
I get your point.
It's okay. It's okay. That's my going. You don't have to be the first. You have to be the one that actually people at some point when you enter the market that they will that you will be able to steal enough people to your corner, right? Because you're cheaper and you're as good as the other ones, or because you have better quality. But at the end, it's about who gets the more share of the market at the end, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
And of course, we have to say also for EU, which was on point also in the report, not only about infrastructure, but part of the infrastructure is also the energy, right? And we talked about energy prices also in the first episode, for example, and we talked about it a little bit with Davide also, that EU has a problem over there. It's not just about being able to build data centers, it's also, if we're going for that example, it's also about being able to run them. And if your energy costs are much higher, then
your costs are higher.
Then your unit costs are higher. So at the end, you cannot be as competitive as the next one. So, but I think this is a point that EU knows, and they have some strategies. Whether they're good or bad, time will show. But they know that it's an important point to actually lower the energy costs somehow.
Yeah, definitely. Right? And I think we mentioned that fragmentation is a huge problem in the energy sector in the EU, right. And that comes to our next topic, right? The geopolitical situation. That is also a factor here for innovation.
And as you say, when we continue with the energy example, is that the fragmentation is also a way why the problem exists so much, but why it cannot become better, right? So I have to say at that point that my position is still to say that EU is doing it in the right way, in a purely political sense, in my opinion, like having a union, like where each has their autonomy, and at the same time being a team, let's say, is on paper a good thing. But at the end, it doesn't help innovation much if you, for example, want to buy energy and you cannot be as one customer.
And
right?
I think also in practice, the EU need to be more unified. You know, it's not just about because in a lot of the economic sectors, industrial sectors, it's always about the economy of scale. And when we talk about the economy of scale, is always about how big or large is the scale.
Yeah, talk about China, right? Huge internal market, 1.4 billion consumers, right? That's economy of scale.
Exactly. How you consolidate this 1.4 billion people, and that's as a consumer market. And the EU is, even the consumer market is fragmented. It's not only the bargaining power for energy prices and be fragmented, but also the consumer market is kind of fragmented, because each country has a different strategy for innovations, so they don't have like a consolidated industrial policy.
No.
Right.
Right. And I think this is a big problem with the EU, and there I also have to concede the point. The current version of the EU does not help like being able to play as a unified player, and this is true that they are unified players both for the US and for China, for example, right? Everything that has to do with that is a point for them, let's say, in competitiveness. On the other hand, I think that there is if you look at it geopolitically, there is a big advantage of the EU, and this is also this fragmentation, because it keeps those differences that you like to have, for example, and is like flexibility, right? I will put it another way, right? So let's stay at the example of technologies for like software and hardware, like computers. Apple and Google are big companies doing important things in that area, but they're just like two companies, right? And nobody can come from outside and tell them what they have to do, which means on paper, again, they will be less robust. You can hope that they will have
too big to fail.
Kind of like that,
okay.
right? So they will be, you can hope that they will have good enough people to catch all possible developments in the market and be able to make some innovations and differences. And in the biggest part, this is true, right? Because they're big enough to have good R&D departments and to be able to look at innovation, and there are people doing only that all day. But if they lose a train at some point, then they just lost it. It's much more difficult for them also to just change their course, right? It's also much more difficult for the state, probably the same with some companies in China, to actually, give them some direction to go somewhere else. Whereas in Europe, you have much smaller companies, you have SMEs, you have small and middle enterprises, which are like stable enough, and so many that a lot of innovations are coming out of that. And we see that, for example, I know lately in Germany, I was in a conference where they talked about, for example, how some small startups somewhere in the west of Germany are doing some super good innovations in, for example, ethical AI, right? And this is great. And then the state knows about it and also pushes it. But this is also the downside, right? The SMEs are not enough to scale up the innovation. Again, they have to be somehow.
They somehow need to consolidate, which will mean like to merge with some other companies, to get bigger and then to get more market pie,
share.
Market share, and so in the process, this is a long process in the EU, as I think we mentioned that also in our first part of the series. So so I guess at the end it's still a lot of the method, the go about should be about how to consolidate and unify that market share.
Right, and or maybe find a way that there is a good process. Again, we're talking about processes in the EU to bring small innovations.
Obsessed with processes.
Yeah. But you can build a good process actually with that, right? And to be able to bring innovations which happen in some countries in the EU very fast to a level where they will be able to scale, right? And I think this is it's a very courageous view of how it should happen, but I don't think it's impossible. It's just at the moment we see that in the EU it doesn't happen so easily, because I don't know, if you have an innovation in a startup in Greece, for example, where I'm originally from, I don't know about it. Nobody knows about it. I think the people in the European Commission where they wrote the report, they also don't know about it, right?
Yeah, I think this for some of the it depends on what area we're talking about, right? If we're talking about some like a very specific medical language model, large language model in medical sector, then maybe you can be successful, out of some of the very small SME enterprises, but if we talk about a generic large language model like ChatGPT or Green from Alibaba, then it's you actually need kind of consolidation or some kind of consolidation.
Right.
First, you need to have a large enough data
model. I get what you mean.
And so then you can train the model on it. And so this is I think this is somehow the weakness or the what is lacked in the EU. It's kind of a consolidation. Yeah,
you don't have this first big model that everybody can use. So at the end, even if you produce something which is actually good and it's a good innovation, you cannot scale it. Again, we come to the scale problem, right?
And of course, and out of my experience, the development time in the EU is extremely long for high-tech products.
Exactly, because this is also not scaled, right? If you scale development time, you will manage to have very small development cycles, right? Where you can produce things and fail and trial again very quickly, right?
I have another point, especially because work-life balance is big in the EU.
Exactly. So salaries also, right? It's also about the unit gain that you get from an employee, right? And with the salaries of the EU, which make for a better, the average salaries, which make for a better level of life, let's say, price of living is lower. And of course, as you say, a lot of holiday doesn't help to actually be able to push down your unit costs, right?
Yeah, this is also as how probably our chancellor would say, it's hurting the competitiveness.
Yeah, well, I mean, one unit of innovation, if we put it like that, in Europe is much more expensive than one unit of innovation in China, right?
Yes, exactly. So, but then I have to also concede, that you don't need to be the first or the second. Somehow it is also good just to be the Disneyland of the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we'll come to a larger point, which is on a meta level. Again, what I was saying in the beginning about what does competitiveness mean, right? It's a little bit, okay, we can all agree, of course, that it's about being fast, and it's also about being like first in a market, let's say, that's one factor, and also about being cheap in order to, because you know that people will go for cheaper products. But at the end, if you look at it on a little bit of bigger timelines, because this is very centered on one point in time, right? It's an example of a race, let's say, again, right? You will be better if you achieve your goal first, but a race is a very short event, right? You need to see what happens also in a longer timeline. And in the longer timeline, my point would be, you can be competitive just in another way. It can be competitive in being the gatekeeper of products, for example, and being the prime regulator, let's say. Or it can be competitive in ensuring that products will not just be, whatever, a new innovation, but they will also be good and quality products. For example, something that Germany has a lot of experience in, and we know that it is a good model, right? Because the machines that Germany produces still, and also produced in the past, were so good that everybody wanted to buy them, and that made them more competitive, right? In the long run, even if they were not so cheap, right?
Yeah. Also, yeah. So at the end, it's kind of a philosophical question, right? Is competitiveness so important?
Right. Let me put it like that. If you want to be competitive if EU wants to be competitive in the same way that China or US can be, they have then, and we define competitiveness that way as important, then they have to be more like them. If they say that it's not so important to be so competitive and we go for other goals, for other KPIs, well, then maybe the report is actually good. And I think also for some things, you don't need a washing machine every year, right? That's the point. Like, who needs innovation in their washing machine? I don't need to. There are also, to your point, is competitiveness so important? I don't need innovation in all my everyday products. I don't know how it's about you. Do you need innovation in all your everyday
also
products?
On the other hand, do people actually want to work 996? If someone knows
also,
the
right?
audience, in China, or do you actually want to work 3 jobs?
Yeah.
As in the US. So
what is the cost of this innovation, right? And the competitiveness, and the human cost, which is usually not factored in, but also very important because, China seems to be, holding on somehow as a society, but they're coming like from another historical point. The US, I think the problems are rather large at the moment, right? Especially having to do with like...
Yeah, it's more like a capitalistic approach in general. So, and so I guess that's not so big with work-life balance here. And so, and on the other hand, maybe the EU can be in a completely different, a different wonderland, so to say.
Yeah.
Not competitive in industry, but maybe still attracting talents because it has a really good job market.
Yeah, for example. Yeah. So what do we say at the end? So competitiveness of the EU. The report, is good. It's good that there is a report, that there was a report, and it is a report that doesn't leave any important parts out, right? How do we feel about the competitiveness of the EU in itself?
Rather not so much competitive, but
right.
But there's other important points, I would say, in life that is more, much more, for important, let's say, than being competitive.
Well, I would like to see you trying to sell that to Mario Draghi and to the industrialists of Europe, which will say, yes, this is all well and good that you say, but
Mario
it's all about the
Draghi
money.
is Italian, I don't think he will, disagree. It's points, yeah.
He knows
but
about
rather
good life.
we will have to probably to convince our new chancellor.
Right, which we don't know what they will do yet. And of course, this is also another topic. I think also we can say the report is also something that, of course, in Europe will not have, like, it will not bring changes that will happen the next year. So I think we can look at an horizon of 5 years and maybe revisit our first podcast then and say,
Exactly,
well,
yeah.
did it work or not? Like, how is Europe standing right now?
Welcome to the comment section.
Exactly. You can also comment and send us some
your insights,
some ideas and your
example.
insights. And I think with that, we would say we are done with this first part. It was very interesting to dive deeper in this matter, I would say. I enjoyed it very much. And what are we doing next?
We will bring more content about new technology, but I will not, say what exactly.
You don't want to spoil it, yeah?
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it. It would be like a little secret now.
Yes, but of course
tuned.
it will be along the lines again of
yes.
It will be about technologies and new technologies, but also about their
also
connection.
about underground, what happened underground.
Exactly, a little bit more what happens on the
yeah.
ground, and a little bit more about their connection with economy in general, because we feel that, and we will say more about it in our next episode, we feel that this specific topic that they will get hasn't been shown very much from that area
correct,
yet.
yeah.
So stay tuned.